but this comes from Bob. It's a bit long, so I'll do my best. He asks this. In the book of Genesis, we read that Adam and Eve were naked, but that they felt no shame. To my mind, this begs at least two questions. First, why, prior to the fall, would it be necessary to point out that they felt no shame? I mean, as God created them, they were naked, and we know that everything God created was very good. So at least originally, being naked would not have been a shameful condition. Secondly, during this same innocent period, while in their naked state, would our first parents have experienced a normal, healthy desire to be intimate with each other? Because again, those sins subsequently corrupted and perverted human sexuality. Sex itself was created and ordained by God as being good. Does the church take a position on these matters?
Thank you for that question. So, as far as the church taking a position on these matters, I don't know if I have a particular reference to go to other than what the church teaches us about man and woman before the fall and after the fall in original sin, and primarily in a number of places, namely the book of Genesis, then the commentaries of the fathers of the church on that, and then of course at the Holy Council of Trent, which talks about the question of original sin, concupiscence, and the errors of the Protestant heretics, especially Martin Luther, on this point. First, let's start with the question of felt no shame. Well, St. Thomas talks about shame in his Summa. He talks about pudicitia, which is the Latin word for it, and he says that shame is not a bad thing. We often think that shame is a bad thing, but what he says is shame is a protection and a defense against sin. It's this feeling that when we encounter things that are harmful to us morally, that cause us shame, it helps us to be pushed away from them or to push them away from us. And so in that sense, shame is a good thing and useful if it helps us to repel these things that are dangerous for our soul. And he says there isn't a particular virtue about it, but nevertheless, the shame is useful. Now, why did Adam and Eve feel no shame? It wasn't because they were naked. No, it was because they had no disorder of concupiscence and of original sin in their souls. They didn't have those deregulated passions that rebelled against their intellect and will because of original sin. And that is a result of original sin. Original sin, we know, has caused weaknesses and wounds in our soul. And one of those weaknesses, which sometimes is used to encapsulate the others, is that of concupiscence. But there's also the weakness of ignorance in our mind, the weakness of malice in our will, the weakness of what's called frailty in our lower powers, as well as concupiscence. And because of that, our passions, which are neither morally good or morally evil in themselves, but can serve a purpose, a good purpose, if subject to our will and reason, are no longer subject there, and they rebel against our reason and will. And so because of that, we need the virtues which we acquire through God's grace, and he gives that to us primarily in the sacraments and prayer to overcome this rebellion that is in our soul because of original sin. And that's, one of the reasons our Lord came, is to die on the cross, to give us those graces so that we can cooperate with him and ultimately join him in heaven. What he says about originally being naked would not have been a shameful condition, that is true, because all that God created is good, but that's because of the interior order that existed in man's soul with regards to bodily goods and bodily pleasures. He had order there and God's grace. Now, during the same, whatever parents have experienced a normal, healthy desire to be intimate with each other, yes, I'm sure they would have, although we know that there were no children during that first time together. They only had children after they left. Now, of course, they had that, or after they left after they were escorted out of the Garden of Eden, having committed the original sin. And so I'm sure certainly they could have had that healthy, normal, intimate desire to be with each other, but it wouldn't have been motivated by any sort of disordered passion in any case. But we know, that they did not have any children until after the fall, when they had Cain, Abel, and then Seth, and certainly probably others. And so there's not really, I think, any particular teaching of the church on that particular point, but I think we can draw those conclusions from it based on what we do know.